I joined Southend High School for Boys in September 1993. I left in 2000 after A-levels and I was in Tuscany. In 2011 I deployed to Afghanistan. I was an Afghan National Police mentor and I was based in Lashkargah, but I had a responsibility for the entire of Helmand province, so I would move in both the British and the American sectors, all the way from Musa Qala in the north down to the south in Lashkargah. I was living as an embedded mentor, so it was myself and a small team. I think we're about 10 of us in total were living and working with the Afghan police in their regional police headquarters in Helmand in Lashkargah. So we were quite isolated. Initially it was Big Boys Toys is the attraction. I joined as a warfare officer, so my primary role during my career was driving ships, but I had a very varied career, and I think that's probably one of the things I wanted to join for. It's a bit cliched, but you want to join, you want to see the world, and you want to go do exciting stuff, and that was my main reason for joining the military.
My father and his father were in the Rifle Brigade, and they were both in the Somme together. Fortunately, both came back home, so I was always interested in the Royal Air Force. I never flew. I finished up as the Royal Air Force Regiment, which I went through right to the end of the war, 1946. We were a young regiment, basically training mostly. I finished up for quite some time as a telephonist in what they called Ops B, which was the operation areas between other airfields and the Army and probably the Navy as well. I was in 2 landings, one in Sicily and Salerno in Italy, and came back just at the time of the V1s, which are collectively named now as the Doodle Bugs, and I was on an anti-aircraft post, a radar system. The end of the war, I was in Germany, and we used to do a term with the army every other night in armoured cars on the Russian border in Germany, and it was quite interesting because you could see across the no man's land all the Russian troops in doing exactly the same job as we do, basically. The idea was to keep refugees in Russia from coming into the UK or the American area or the French area. Well, the medal starting from this side here, the War Medal, which everybody got who joined the forces. The second one was the Defence Medal, and that was obviously the defence of the country. I received that one because I was in the Home Guard, now called Dad's Army, of course. And the next to Italy is the first one. The Middle East, that's Egypt, was the second one. And the 1939-45, which you know would be the whole 5 years of the war, you never received that medal unless you got one of these 2, which are campaign medals. And you had to be, shall we say, in Egypt for 6 months at least before you got the 1939-45.
I come from Canterbury, and I went to a school pretty much like this one here, only it had borders. But I always wanted to have something to do with aeroplanes, so instead of following what the school wanted me to do and go off to university, I joined the Air Force. I signed up for 9 years altogether, but I only did 8 of them because I got an ear infection, and that's restricted the aircraft I was allowed to fly in, so I came out a little bit early. For about 3 of those years was in Northern Ireland, and another 3 was in Singapore. In between times it was basically learning my trade. When I was in Northern Ireland, our main task, apart from search and rescue, because that was also a very important part of our job, but the main military task was to watch the Russian fleet. At that time, we distrusted the Russians even more than we do now. And so whenever they put to sea, we used to have to shadow them 24 hours a day, try and pick up their submarines. That was our main task, was watching for submarines. So that was really, most of the time, was all our efforts were geared to keeping an eye on the Russians. When I was in Singapore, it's a bit different. The Indonesians was wanting to increase their influence in Malaysia, and the RAF was out there to try and stop them, in as much as if you saw any signs of them making incursions across the water, then we'd be there to let them know. It was just a job. I mean, and most of us were there because we liked flying. It was just a job. I was in the Air Force at Ballykelly at the time that the Cuba crisis came up. We had to rush down to the squadron. We had to put real bombs on the aircraft, and we were on instant readiness to go to war. That was the closest we ever got to anything. I suppose that had an impact at the time, but looking back on it, it's just one of those things that happened. All right, well, the top one is the Coastal Command. Everybody's heard of Fighter Command from the Battle of Britain. Everybody's heard of Bomber Command from the Dan Busters era. But there were other commands, and Coastal Command was the one that I was in, because basically we were flying out over the sea 99% of the time. So that's the command badge. And the other one was, the first squadron I was on was 210 Squadron. That's actually a First World War squadron. It was number 10 in the Royal Naval Air Service. And when the RAF was formed on the 1st of April 1918, they gave it, put 2 in front of it and made it 210 in the Royal Air Force. I was in 205 at Changi, but I haven't been able to find a badge for that. That's why I haven't got one. The medals, this is the General Service Medal. It didn't matter whether you were in the Army or the Air Force, the medal was the same. The Navy had their own, it's slightly different. But it was a campaign medal. It was for being in a particular campaign, and it had a clasp on it. Mine has got Malaya, Malay Peninsula on it. Other people have got the Suez, Cyprus, all sorts of places around the world that we were involved. The other one, which is much brighter looking, is the Malayan medal for the same thing, and the Malayan government decided some years ago that we all deserve one of those. So I could have gone to Chelmsford and picked it up from the High Commissioner, but I was on holiday at the time, so I got it sent to me in the post.